Okay, I'm going to show a game between uh, Grandmaster Viswanathan Anand in his early years, back in 1987 in Polugaevsky City, Philippines. At that time, he was 17. I believe this is in April of that year or a little bit later. And he was playing uh, Kiril, Kiril, uh, Nino. Uh, Nino and I think or Ninoz, and anyway, he's a player um, from Hungary that became international master. But any case, we end up in an interesting variation of the Sicilian. Let's go ahead and take a look. White played e4, black played c5. White played knight f3, black plays e6. And e6, of course, prepares for d5. If you can get this in without any weaknesses, then it's been often suggested that you are on your way to getting an equal game as black. So white plays d4, black takes, white takes, and black plays a6. So with this move, black declares his intentions of moving the b pawn to b5 very quickly. But black also is starting to place all their pawns on white squares, which means it makes it a little bit tougher on you because you're going to have to watch the light squares a lot more carefully or recognize that they're often weaker. So in any case, white decides to play bishop d3. And the suggestion is that if instead of a6, black in playing this line could have tried to play knight s6 at first, and then get white to play knight c3, and then play a6, and then get into this variation. This is one possibility anyway. And we go back though. Here, notice that white can't push e5 because then black plays queen to a5 check, picks up the pawn. So in any case, though, black decides not to bring the knight out first and plays the a6 line, and white decides not to play knight c3 yet, but play bishop d3. So Viswanathan is waiting for black to play d5, for example, and then have the possibility of opening this long diagonal to the h7 square or squares toward the king side. And perhaps in some lines maybe offer a little bit of resistance to black playing f5, trying to break over there. So black plays bishop c5, which is Kiril, who, by the way, I believe later became an international master. He's hitting the knight on d4, and this is a typical move that you see in the Paulson variation. There are several sidelines here. But black threatens the knight, and white decides, okay, well, I'm going to bring the knight back to b3, and then black has to decide. Okay, so my bishop is the only piece I have to guard all these weak dark squares, and he decides to bring the bishop back to a7. Of course, if you brought the bishop back to b6, then you'd be blocking your own b7 pawn. So black plays bishop a7, white decides to bring the knight out, okay, and black decides, okay, I'll bring my knight out too on the queen side, build my influence over the d4 and b4 squares, fight for the center. And white decides, okay, well, if you're going to weaken all these squares here, I'm going to try with your e6 and a6. I'm going to try to trade dark square bishops. And black decides, okay, I'm not worried about that. I'm ready to transpose into variations that were somewhat known at that time, back in 1987. And white plays bishop e3, and black decides, okay, let's do it. Let's trade bishops. Queen takes bishop, and now I'm just going to continue to develop. Okay, so what do you got here? Well, white does have all their pieces out. White's obviously preparing to castle queenside, because castling queenside would leave this rook on this open file that was created in an open Sicilian where you played d4 and traded pawns. And black So recognizing that black will probably try to castle on the king side, because I have all these pieces on the queen side, this one thing that kind of encourages him to try out g4. And the idea of g4, of course, is if black takes, then we can move the queen over. There's two easy weaknesses in here that are undefended in black's camp: the knight and the pawn on g7. They're all lined up in that g file. So you play queen g3. Obviously, this isn't possible, guarding the knight, because you set up a pin on your own knight, and white just pushes the pawn and picks up the knight. And if black pushes the pawn to guard the knight, then we just play h3 anyway and go pick up the g-pawn. So none of these are really that hot. Black is going to have to move his knight back. However, if we follow it through, white takes, and black gets something out of it first. Black would get the g-file. So taking the pawn doesn't seem quite that bad, but white has to play here, and then maybe black plays bishop d7, something like that. And it looks like white doesn't have a real big advantage yet. Okay, black would be able to move his queen out and castle his king on the queen side. So queen d7, bishop d7, and get his king castled. So black gets a little bit out of trading pawns there too. So it's not clear that black necessarily doesn't want to take that g4 pawn. Nonetheless, black is convinced that they don't want to take the g4 pawn, and black decides, okay, well, I'm just going to play b5. I'm going to counterattack. If you're going to start stretching these pawns out on the king side and try to create an attack and push my pieces back, then I'm ready to do the same on the queen side. And so white says, okay, well, I don't think you're ready to take that pawn yet. You didn't seem like you're interested in taking it earlier, so I'll castle. At least I'll get my one of my last pieces out. After castling, my rook is ready to put pressure on your weakened pawn, especially a little bit weaker than a lot of variations of Sicilian where you play e6 and d6, because there's no bishop on the dark squares to guard the d pawn, and so the d6 pawn is a natural target. And black decides, well, you're right. I'm not really interested in taking this pawn and going in for these complications. It would, of course, be worse now for black to try this, because then when white pushes the queen over, now when your knight goes back, where does black put their king? Now that you push this b pawn to b5, even if you get your bishop out and your queen out on the queen side and you castle the queen side, your king is a little bit more exposed than when the b pawn was back on b7. So now it becomes more questionable, a little bit more questionable as to whether or not black really wants to take that g4 pawn. And black decides, you know what? I think my king's safe over here. So black castles. And white decides, okay, well, I'm going to play g5 and kick your knight. Black decides to play the knight to e8. It looks like it was probably perhaps strong, or maybe even stronger, to go to d7 than maybe b6 or something like that. Because on e8, of course, you're cutting off your rook. Your knight still has to get to c7, and it's clear even from c7, your knight's still having some issues getting activated properly. So I'm not convinced that knight e8 was a very good choice at all. And Anand decides, okay, well, I'm ready. I'm going to start pushing these pawns, possibly create the threat of f5 or e5, and try to create some open lines over here. Try to open this up, trade some pawns, get something going on the king side. And black decides, okay, well, I'm ready to push too. So it attacks the knight. Knight goes back to e2, and black plays a5. So with a5, black signals their intention, b4 and a5. Obviously, black is pushing these pawns, which, by the way, happens a lot in the Sicilian. And black's getting ready to push these pawns in here, possibly sacrifice the pawn, a pawn or two, try to open up lines so that black can go after white's king. Okay. So obviously, since this pawn, this a pawn being pushed would threaten that knight, white decides, okay, well, I'm going to move that knight out of the way, okay, and not let you play this with tempo, with an extra move. Black decides, okay, well then I'll just trade knights with you. White brings that slightly more passive knight out, right? Not that great a square for it to have it on e2. And black plays queen b6. Okay. Okay, and can somebody tell me where this knight can move to? Even though this looks like a nice pin on the a7 g1 diagonal, that knight looks like it's pinned. Where can that knight go to?
I think it was f5.
To f5, exactly.
Yeah, it was f5.
Nice, excellent. Because then, of course, if black tries to take your queen, then you can take their queen, right? And if black has no time to take your knight because your queen's threatening their queen, okay? So it is possible to move that knight, but trading queens doesn't seem like that hot of an idea. You know, we already traded a couple pieces. Why should we be trading queens? Might even make it a little bit easier for black to defend their d6 weakness. So instead, after queen b6, white decides, okay, well, I'm ready to open these, open some squares over here on the king's side. I'm going to play for e5. And so white plays for e5, getting ready to put pressure on h7. And here I'm going to ask you guys a question, okay? You play e5. What would you play if black, let's say, played pawn takes pawn? What would you play as white? You know, you've just opened this diagonal, right? By pushing this pawn, you just opened this diagonal. If black takes your pawn, instead of just taking their pawn back, what else could you do?
Bishop sacrifice.
Okay, bishop sacrifice on h7, I'm assuming you mean, right? Check. If the king takes, then what?
Over with the
Queen to the here check.
then you're just gonna fizzle out.
And the king goes back to there. Yeah, it looks like you still have attack, but it looks like it's fizzling. That's for sure. Where else? Yeah. How about queen to e4? What would queen to e4 be threatening?
Checkmate.
Be threatening checkmate, but it makes one other threat when he goes there too.
Rook.
What else is he threatening? Threatening the rook. Okay. So there's that possibility. Okay, it becomes possible to do
Then
that.
you could move the white bishop. Oh no, then that would be checkmate.
It's a checkmate. Yeah. So it's possible to do that anyway. It's so black instead decides, well, I'm going to make sure you can't get your queen to e4 ever. Okay, regardless of whether or not it's possible to allow it. He plays bishop b7, and of course, not only does he prevent queen e4, but what's that bishop threatening on b7?
Rook.
The rook. So now white has to move the rook, so they move the rook over to f1. And by placing the rook on f1, you help prepare for this move too. You help prepare for the push to f5 with your rook behind it. Black doesn't want you to be able to play f5, so black decides, okay, I'm going to take this pawn. Now, you could take with the queen, but why not try to open the file for your rook? Okay. Anand decides, okay, I'll take with my pawn. I've got a grip on this f6 square. Okay. And then black decides, okay, I'm going to go ahead and play, I'm going to try rook d8 here. Okay. And my idea is I'm I'm going to put pressure on that knight on d4. Okay, and here the fireworks starts. Okay, here's where the fireworks starts. Okay. So I want you to look around here and tell me why you think that white should have an attack. For you to be able to say you have an attack or that you have a better position because of all the squares you control in one area of the board, you have to first judge that. You have to first pull back and say, okay, I think I have control of this, control of that. I think I have this possibility, this possibility. That tells me that maybe I might have an attack here. What do you think is telling white here that they might have an attack? What do you guys think?
Well, black's kind of pushed all to the king's row.
Push what?
There's like three pieces, and the king all pushed to the king's row. You've only got really two pieces that are out.
Right. Okay.
The one thing,
So yeah, his knight's back on e8, which is pretty passive. The knight being on e8, by the way, cuts communications between what pieces when the knight's on e8?
the two rooks.
Yeah, these two rooks. Which of these rooks do you think is most vulnerable? Is most likely to be a problem?
One to the left.
I,
One that's covered by the
yeah,
queen.
that one's covered by the queen. How about the one over here? I mean, I think there may be some tactics here where somehow that becomes vulnerable, but f8 is going to be now a problem to defend. So your statement of, well, the knight's back there, it's pretty passive, I think that's a very valid point because the rooks are not protecting one another as they might otherwise be doing without that knight there. Another issue is what access if we have an attack here, where is our access? Are we attacking in the center, would you say? These central squares? Are we attacking on the queen side? Or are we attacking on the king side? Where do you think we'd have an attack here?
The king side.
King
the
side.
white pawn.
Okay. So we have pressure on what over here? Do we have any pressure on any of these squares over here? Okay, h7. We have pressure there with the bishop.
F7.
F7. The rooks have. We have pressure on F7. Okay. These pawns are preventing black from doing what here? These pawns are preventing black from playing what with respect to their pawns? Black isn't going to want to play h6. Would you agree? Is black going to want to play f6, do you think? Would you play f6 if you were black? Okay, it might be okay, but it looks a little bit risky, doesn't it? Because if they take, then they're opening up this file against your king. Maybe pushing your king more toward the corner. Who knows? You might be okay there, but it certainly seems a little bit risky. Okay, without analyzing it yet. So we have pressure on h7. We have pressure on f7. We have the pawns on f6. How about what this white queen does? Does this white queen help you attack on the king side? Now it seems like it's blocked on e5, it's blocked on g5, but where could that queen go to apply more pressure? Yeah, not to h what? To h3, right? So you could play the queen over there. Your queen's ready to go, and what about the white rooks? If you could get a move or two in, what could you do with these rooks that might cause trouble over here on the king side? How could you get any of these rooks over here to the king side? Yeah, rook lift, right? They like to call it. This rook could be lifted to what square? To where? F4. Not here because they could take you, but F4. And then the rook from there could go where? Now that you play rook F4, yeah, rook to H4. Then maybe you could play, then you'd be putting pressure on H7, maybe you have queen E2, H5, but already, even with just the rook on H4 and your bishop on D3, this is looking like a real problem for black. Now, by the way, if we back up a move, okay, right now, we can see there's a lot of attack going on. If we back up a move, it would be better for black to play G6 instead of rook to D8. Because G6 does what? How does G6 make it a little bit more difficult for white to start an attack over there?
It prevents the bishop.
Yeah, it definitely blocks the bishop, doesn't it? Definitely blocks the bishop. Makes it a little bit more difficult to attack. And if black had played that move, maybe the game would have had a different turn. But instead, black played rook to d8, and white starts his attack. Anand says, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to take the pawn on h7. So let's take a look at that. By the way, you were directly or indirectly recognizing that the rook on f8, Tom, is a problem, right? Would you agree?
Yeah.
Because the knight cuts off protection.
Locked in.
Yeah. And the only thing defending that rook is what?
King.
The king. So one of the things that taking this pawn does is it pulls the king away from doing what? From protecting the rook on f8. So let's continue to look. Okay, so now we've invested the bishop. Hopefully that means that we can pivot pieces around over here and start
Oh, I see
continue
it.
attacking.
I see it.
What do you see?
You move the queen to the right, and then you attack
Queen over
with
here,
the knight.
check. Okay, so queen check here. Then the king goes back to g8, guards the rook. Then
But
what?
Then you attack the pawn with the knight.
Okay,
on
so let's
the-
try it.
on the
Queen h3
key
check,
rook.
king to g8, and then what?
Then the knight over to attack the pawn.
This pawn here?
Yeah.
Okay. What is protecting that pawn?
Uh,
Uh,
the queen.
The queen. So if the queen takes your knight, are you going to be happy? Is that what you wanted?
I think that's a mistake.
Yeah. If the queen wasn't guarding that, maybe this would start something, right? I agree with you. This could start something here. Because
I'm
if
trying
that
to start
queen
something.
if that queen was on a7, let's say, I could try that, right?
but
Knight takes, and then if they did take, which obviously they wouldn't necessarily have to do, they could try taking this rook. But if they took back with a pawn, then my queen could take check. Maybe I could drive the king away from the rook on f8, right? Okay.
So what about advancing the pawn then?
G6. Okay.
What would be wrong
And
with
then
that?
if they take the pawn, then what?
Then you take the rook.
Take the rook. Okay, with check. Then the king takes.
Then you go in with the queen
With the queen where?
to h8.
H8 check. Okay. Then the king, let's say, goes to e7, then what?
Uh, stuck.
Okay.
Unless you
Actually, I think you still have an attack here. I mean, you certainly,
Yeah, but
you can, for example, you have a check here, right? Or I was looking for the checks.
Mhm.
And it looks to me like you still have some pressure here, but it's not yet
No.
certain. If I go back here, check, maybe all I'm doing is getting him to move his king back over this way.
And you move your rook
I can
over.
move my rook over check and force him into that pocket, but where am I getting myself? I'm not sure. I can see some ways of attacking. Okay, like let's suppose I play rook here check. He goes here, g8. And then I could take this pawn
Or you could go with your queen
because their queen can't guard this and this, right?
in front of the like to e7.
What is it?
E7.
The queen to e7? Okay, there.
That looks interesting.
Okay. And then if they play what? Queen takes knight. How are we going to finish them?
Running out of material.
Yeah, this queen is, by the way, when it takes the knight, just happening to guard this square. So I can't really play like rook there, check, king up, and then mate him
Right.
because their queen's guarding that square now. So, maybe I could take the knight here, but might get myself in trouble myself by moving that rook off the back rank, right? Okay, I could bring the queen in there, check, but then the king comes up there. I'm running out of pieces, like you said. Okay, so, but it does appear though that this is a way of creating an attack. Okay, and let's take a look at how Anand did this. Anand said, okay, I'm going to take the pawn check. I'm going to get your king to come up, and then because your king's not guarding f8, I'm going to make a move that you probably don't think is that hot. How about g6 check?
Uh,
What do you think of that? Isn't what we'd love to have a pawn on g6 and a queen on h3? Wouldn't that be nice? That would be nice, right?
sounds good.
And we know that this g6 check, although it might look counterintuitive, certainly means that is certainly a problem for black because black can't take with this pawn. Anand managed to distract the king just for a moment, not so that it doesn't guard f8, and then that allows g6 check to be a stronger move, right? Where black is not interested in taking the pawn and letting me just snap off a rook. Okay, I'd get all my material back, wouldn't I? What do you guys think about the king taking that pawn?
He's in worse shape.
Okay. Okay, but let's look at that. So let's suppose he takes the pawn with the king. How can we continue this attack? Now, if you just start checking him, let's say queen g3 check, and his king goes back to h7, does that seem like I'm making progress there? If I check him on g3 with my queen, queen g3 check, and then king h7, Did I make some progress by playing that check? Or did I help black get to a safer position with his king? Is king safety less of an issue for black if white plays queen g3 check and black plays king h7? Okay. Queen h3 check, then king to g8. Oh, queen h3 first. Okay, so your idea is maybe I can cut the king off, not let them get back, right? I think that's a very valid move. It may be a winning move. I'm not sure yet, but it looks pretty strong. Okay, and it makes a lot of sense. Can I make a check though and prevent them from running their king back in that hole, back to g8? Is there a check here so that they can't get back to g8?
D3.
D3 with what?
Queen.
Queen. So he played queen d3 check. Okay. Now what does he do? Now you can see why this is going to be an issue, right? Because we're stopping him from running back there in that hole. Okay. And there's a few ways for him to try to get out of this. First of all, does he save himself by just saying, you know what, you're just checking me around. I'll just move my king over here. What can we do then? What would you guys do if you just said, I don't think you're doing anything here?
Then you move your queen to
To-
the H file.
To the H file, exactly. Because you keep the king, just like you were saying earlier, right? You don't let the king move back into H7 and get their king back. You drive him to this file. Now how do we keep going with this?
Rook.
Rook to G1 check. And now he's going to move his king where?
One of those two.
You're not going to move the
There's
king?
only one space.
There's only...
There's
Where's the
no
one space? Well, there's no spaces.
No
There's
space.
He does have
Right
one
on the
move.
spaces.
He does have one move, but not with the king. What's his one
the
move
knight,
here?
or the knight.
Bishop to
Bishop, excuse me.
G2 check, or bishop G2, and then what?
Rook
And
takes-
rook takes bishop, and it's over, right? Okay, so backing that up, we can tell that when we checked him on D3, him going to H6 isn't really helping him much. So if we check him on D3, then he's going to have to do what? Does your instincts tell you, well, maybe he can move his king up to G5 or H5 and that would be okay? No, that's not going to be okay. So he's got to try F5, doesn't he? So all we have to do is analyze that and make sure we get something from that, right? We have given up a bishop for the knight, or for the pawn on H7, excuse me. We've also given up our G pawn, so effectively we've given up a bishop. But we have gotten that king, we have smoked that king out. We have put that king in a situation where, of course, it's less safe. So F5, and what would you do here? What do you think?
So,
Take with the rook.
Take the pawn with the rook?
Oh, with the, you don't have to use the rook.
Okay.
Use the knight.
um,
Now I think there's a move that you guys are missing here.
Just move the rook over.
Okay, move the F pawn to F5. Do you think is your instinct to say put a queen on G3 or rook on G1? Is that your instinct to get a winning attack? No. Okay, that's probably not going to work. We might be able to find some way to make it work, but it's looking pretty bad. We need to keep on attacking the king right now in such a way that they are having trouble. But black just played, what was black's last move? What was black's last move? F5.
You could,
Which means you can do what?
you could take the pawn.
Yes.
You take the pawn and pass it.
Yeah, en passant.
Sorry.
And this happens in in some of those other bishop h7 sacrifices, right? Where you check, and then if they play f5, then you're able. One of the things you may be able to do is to take en passant. Okay, now you've got them in check. What do you think black's instinct is to do? Move the king over to h6, or to move to f7? Where would you think you'd be safe? Safer. F7 seems a little bit safer, doesn't it? Okay, but it looks like I think he's in trouble whichever way he goes. Let's say he goes there. How are we going to continue to attack here? What can we do? We got another pawn, by the way. A pawn for our bishop. How can we continue to open lines, to open squares around the king? What move would you play to continue to open squares around the king?
I'm thinking taking them on, but
Yes, with G7, right? F6 takes G7. That starts to open up more lines, doesn't it? Okay, so let's try it. Let's see what happens. Take the pawn check. What would you do now if you were black? Okay, to the left over here.
yeah.
Okay, let's try that for a second. Let's see what happens.
He
What do you think?
He queens.
Yeah, he queens with check. Actually, I'm guessing that's not the best move, though.
I'm thinking not.
That's not the best move.
Probably take the pawn.
Because if we just controlled all these squares, whereas king could try to run like d7, if we control that square, and then we take the queen, isn't that mate?
Yeah.
Isn't that checkmate? If we could control that square. So what in between move could you make so that you're guarding that square? What pieces does white have that might help them control that square suddenly?
White bishop.
Look at all white's pieces. What pieces might help them control d7? The square where black's king might run away. The queen, right? The move of the knight. And how could we ditch this knight real quick so our queen's guarding that square, and then queen? Where could we ditch this knight? Yeah. What do you guys think? Knight to c6?
Double check.
Because it's check, right? But when that knight moves, more importantly, the queen then has influence over d7. And then no matter how he takes that knight, what's our next move going to be? Yeah, just take the rook and get a queen, right? And that's checkmate. What do you guys think? Isn't that checkmating too with this move? Check. Queen influences that square now. He has no runaway square. And then no matter how he takes it, we take on f8 and get a queen. That's mate. Isn't that mate? Make sense? Okay, let's go back. Okay, so I guess king e7 isn't that hot. White has a nice little antidote for us. So what is black going to do? Is your instinct as black to move your king back here and not even take that pawn? No, he's just going to take it, right? With his pawn, get a queen. It's got to be over. So the only way he could possibly survive this is to take this, or to bring this knight up in front. Would your instinct be to take this pawn if you were black and figure I'm probably okay? Would you guys think you're okay? No way. What would you do if he took the pawn? What would you do?
Move the queen.
Yeah. This rook here controls. Yeah, this rook here controls all these squares in the F file, right? You've got him cut off. All you have to do is start bantering him on these files here, the G and the H file. So queen G3 check starts that process, and let's say he moves to what? H7. He moves to H8. Then when I play rook takes rook, he'd be in check, right? So he'd have to try this maybe. And now what? What do you think? Okay. H3 check? Okay.
H4.
H4 check? Okay. And then the king's going to have to go to one of these squares. Let's say he goes here.
Keep moving up.
Do what? With his king going back here, what blockader did he gain when his king went there? How can he start blocking checks? Like if I
With
check
the
on the
knight.
G file with the knight now. So I'm going to have a plan for that. It's going to be a problem.
Move the. If you move the rook over, when he moves over to the right, you can go with the queen.
Okay. Remember rook over here, check.
Yeah,
Then if he moves his knight in,
yeah. Then you can. See here.
I think it's looking a bit tough, isn't it?
And that's tough.
I mean, there might be something here, but I haven't seen it yet.
Go ahead and just take
He's
it.
guarding this.
Just take
Yeah.
it.
You can take it? Sure, why not?
Just take
Or
it.
he sacrificed almost all our pieces.
Yeah.
Let's go for it. Now what?
Now move that old rook over.
Rook over G1
He's got
check.
nothing to
So we
do.
got these files guarded, but now there's no rook on the F file, so he gets to start running this way. Do we have a way to polish him off? Let's see if we do. Maybe we do.
Maybe.
Okay. What do you think? Maybe not rook to F1 check, because maybe he goes with the G file. Okay, G1, right? And then we could go queen G5 check, but then he goes over. His rook's guarded now from our rook. We could try checking him here. We could try checking him here, right? Try checking him here. So if I check him on, let's say, H7, his king gets tucked away, it looks like, on E8. And then I'm down to maybe checking him on H5. But then he can bring his king back to E7. Kind of hard to see how we're going to do this. Maybe we could then play our rook to their check. Okay. And then maybe his king can go to D6. It's not easy to see how we're polishing him off. We might be able to figure something out here, but it's looking pretty complicated. Let's go back.
Sacrificing the rook wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, let's. Well, I'm not convinced of that, but it's certainly pretty complicated, right? We definitely have to have all our ducks in a row. Okay, so let's look at this again. He takes on G7. Takes on G7. Okay, let's suppose we play check there on G3, right? Like you said, he plays King H7. Well, now we can do what besides checking him? What can we do if we don't want to check him? Yeah, you just checked his king away from the rook. If we take that rook, then what's the material so far? Did we get enough for our sacrifice? What do you think? Did we get enough for our sacrifice?
Material for a sacrifice.
Yeah. If I take his rook, do I get enough for a sacrifice? For that sacrifice?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, if I
Why
play
would you
rook
say-
takes rook,
Yeah, it's good.
am I behind in material or ahead in material?
Oh, I see the question. Really?
Okay.
Little-
I've got an extra pawn, right? Because I've got the C2 pawn. Okay. And I've got a rook for a bishop. Okay. Now, by the way, to see who's ahead and who's behind here, notice that these rooks pair up, these queens pair up, these knights pair up, and we just have to ask what's left. Well, there's a bishop against the other rook. Bishop against rook. How do the pawns pair up? These two pawns pair up with each other, B and A file pawns. The H pawn on H2 pairs up with the E6 pawn, but it looks like there's one extra pawn there, doesn't it? So white has a pawn and a rook for a bishop. See it? Okay, pawn and a rook for a bishop. But unfortunately, he also has something that he can take. He could take the knight. What do you think of that? Is that going to mean that he gets his material back? Rook takes knight.
loses.
Is this rook doing anything before it moves? Okay, that rook is guarding the knight on e8. So it might be the case that even if he tries to take this knight right now, maybe I can just take this knight. But there's something better. With this rook all the way up on f8 and my queen on the g file, I'm controlling a lot of squares right around the king. Let's see what happens. Let's suppose he takes the knight, says, you know what? I'm just going to take your knight. I'm going to try to create trouble for you, for your king. Maybe I can trade rooks with you, try to create trouble. But now I have a rook and a queen over here to attack his king with. How do I do this, guys? You see a way for me to keep on attacking his king. Rook controlling this file, queen controlling this file. Queen to g8, so I can go to g8 check. Okay, I'm going to try that one. One danger is my queen's falling away from this area where I might be able to protect my king if he tries to trade rooks or get his queen in there. Okay, but queen g8 check, king h6. Now what? Queen h8 check. Okay, so king g6. Okay, rook to g8 check, right? Okay, rook to g1 check. All right. Rook to g8 check, right? Okay, now he's got f7 or f5. If I'm black, I'm thinking, can I get over closer to my pieces again? So let's try f5 first. Okay, what? That ruins your move?
No, that wasn't my move.
Okay. I'm sorry?
That wasn't my move.
Oh, what was your
I said
move?
rook to G1.
Okay. Rook to where?
G1.
G1 check. There we go. Okay, so in other words, I'm controlling the H file, I'm controlling the F file. All I need to do is control the G file, right? So he brought the rook over G1, and he's going to throw the bishop in the way and the rook in the way, but we know it's going to be mate, don't we? Okay. So we're mating him. Okay, so that worked out pretty good. So rook takes knight is not possible because we mate him with the sequence of checks here, which may not be that surprising to you because we control these files. We had to smoke him out. We had to check on the H file to get his king to the G file, but then we had that extra rook to check him on the G file too. Okay. So let's back up. Okay, so apparently if we play pawn takes pawn check, that's not doing him much good to take with his king, so he's going to have to bring the knight up. Okay, what can we do now? And knight's a bit defensive, right? It's helping to at least block the rook's influence for a bit, but of course the knight is itself pinned.
If you took the knight with the rook, could you then? Oh, that's right.
You could take back,
and then you take the rook, and then you did the.
okay? But if you're going to take the rook, can you just take the rook anyway?
Could just take the rook.
Okay. Yeah, it looks to me like you could take the rook anyway. Doesn't really change the situation much, except for gives me one more rook, right? And if I get a queen here, I'm guessing they're, probably going to take it. Take back, right? By the way, what's the material right now? Who's ahead, who's behind? Sorry? White's ahead. That's right. And because if I pair this rook with this rook, this knight with this knight, this queen with this queen, then I've got a rook for a bishop. And the pawn, this E6 pairs with H2. The B and A pawns pair with each other. White has an extra pawn there too. So White's going to be winning by material. They do have some some good tactics here, though. For example, if I could play check here, let me suggest this. If I could play check here, his king moves out of the way and I get the bishop, that'd be great. But his queen is what's guarding the bishop right now. You see it? That relationship? So what I could do is I could take this. Now let me give you some reasons why. If he took with the queen, then his queen's no longer guarding what? The bishop, which opens the door for me to play queen to H7 check and then go pick up his bishop. Does that make sense? Also, if he's not going to take with the queen, what is he going to take with? Well, he could try taking with the king, but is your instincts to say, if I'm black, well, yeah, I think I could probably take the knight and be okay. Now, that looks a little bit dangerous, doesn't it? But let's see. Let's prove it. Do we have any checks here? Can we threaten anything? Or would be a good check here? Probably several ways to win this, I'm guessing. But how about
the queen to the there?
Right here? I agree.
And when he moves the rook.
So queen f5 check, and now he can move his king here. He can move his king to here, right? Let's try each one of those. If he moves his king here,
Then rook comes up.
I try this rook up.
Yeah.
Okay. So rook d7 check. Then let's suppose he plays king e8.
Other rook over.
Yeah, that looks pretty good. Rook to their check. But he does have a defense here, doesn't he? What could he
Yeah.
put in the way of all this? He could put a piece in the way, couldn't he? Okay. So let's suppose, example, he put the knight in the way and said, I'm also threatening your queen. Is there a way for me to polish him off? What do you think? Not easy, is it? Let me suggest this
Over to the right with the.
to over here.
No, then you're.
Was that queen? Yeah, the queen is right now guarding
Yeah.
d7 for his king to run away. So check over here might work, but it looks like we're sure giving him more opportunities. Okay,
You took
but what's guarding this guy? Let me suggest this. What's guarding this guy?
the bishop.
The bishop. So if I could get rid of the bishop, I could take this knight and continue my attack. So what does that suggest I might be able to try? What's guarding the knight?
Took the bishop,
Bishop.
with the rook.
Yeah. You see it? I'm not sure this works yet, but it looks like it might be good because the queen or the bishop is a pretty staunch defender of the knight. The queen takes, then I can take back here and maybe get some play. Okay. Let's try it. Suppose I play check here. Okay. Where's he going to go?
To the left.
Yeah, he's not going to block with the queen because then we could just take it. We're certainly okay there. In fact, the only squares king can go to is where? You can only go where? Only go to d8, right? But what's the king trying to defend right now before it goes to d8?
The rook.
Trying to defend the rook. And so when he goes king d8, then we're going to play what? Queen takes
Take rook.
f8 check. Not sure that's the best, but we're going to be a rook ahead, aren't we? That's got to be winning. So let's look at the mechanics of that tactic for just a second. Okay. It looks like he was almost okay when we played check by blocking with the knight, but we recognize that the defensive piece here is the bishop. So if I take this bishop, then I am undermining, I am taking away the nice protection of that knight. And even though he's hitting my queen, after I take the bishop, I'm also hitting his queen. Are you with me? I see it. And so he doesn't want to trade queens. I just got a bishop. He doesn't want to trade queens then, and plus, by the way, his knight would be pinned, wouldn't it? So if I take the bishop, that's crushing. That makes sense?
And your rook guards against an attack from his queen.
My rook on e1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guarding against
Yeah,
an
he can't go
attack.
queen e3 check or anything. But yeah, I just play rook takes bishop, and
He could,
I don't think there's
he
anything
could
there.
swing all the way over and attack the king
To attack the king where?
from the h file.
From you mean h6? Ah, maybe I am missing that.
Your
Yeah,
queen would be vulnerable.
yeah, he got a shot there, didn't he? Okay, I think I let him off the hook. I think I'm in trouble, aren't I?
Mm-hmm.
I want you guys to tell me what's going to happen. First of all, if the king goes to d1, that's out of the picture because why? Can't go to d1 because he just plays queen d2. So I'm going to have to go to king to b1. Then what can we do? Well, first of all, when I took the bishop, I was depending on the fact that when your rook takes my queen, I take your queen, right? But if I have to move my king right now, what changed with your queen on h6 instead of b6? Now the rook is no longer threatening the black queen. So if white plays king b1, what's black going to do? Take the queen, right? Okay.
But I would.
Okay, exactly. So very cool, guys. Okay. So it looks like rook takes bishop looked great, but didn't quite do it because he did have that one defense, didn't he? Queen h6 check, and the knight was ready to go to d2. I mean, control these squares. It let black off the hook. So pretty cool. Okay, so is there a way to win this then? Okay, is there a way to win this? How about what? Go ahead.
I was saying he couldn't have moved the knight because of the rook.
It couldn't do what?
Moved the knight because the rook got his cutting pin.
Right. This is pinned.
Right.
But I was trying rook takes bishop. Is there another way for us to win this thing? Let's see. Queen. No. Queen h5. Takes rook. Rook d1. King to c7 or c8. Don't like it. Okay,
What
so
if you, um,
queen e5, king takes rook, rook d1 check. That looks like it has a little bit of promise. This king goes to c8 though. And it's hard to see how we're going to follow up there. What do you guys think? Okay.
I mean, it seems like H7 for the queen would be the only attack I can see.
H7 for the queen?
But you're not actually attacking, it's like a two-move. Because then you're protecting your rook, and in the next move you can be right next to the king.
So you're going to play what? Queen to h7?
To H7.
Okay. Okay, and leave that knight pinned and pile up on the bishop? I think that's very reasonable.
Well, you
Okay.
double attack it, but you also are attacking a checkmate on the king.
Yeah, you're threatening. The way we got in trouble with my move, rook takes bishop, was the queen got to h6, right?
And
Check.
you're protecting the d2.
So by playing queen there, it's defending that. I agree. I like that. So let's see how that works. Queen h7. Now we're hitting the bishop. That looks pretty strong. I'm impressed. And that bishop can't just move away anywhere because it's trying to hold that knight and stop my rook from crashing through. So how's he going to guard that bishop? What's he going to do? He can't move the knight back and guard it because the knight's pinned. And we are threatening checkmate as well as threatening the bishop, like you pointed out. I think that's good enough. That looks to me like that's good enough. I'm sorry? Queen to where? C5. Okay, so that stops the E7 checkmate. But it doesn't stop us from just taking the bishop, right?
Right. No, we counterattack.
Okay. I'm sorry?
No, counterattack queen G5.
G5 check. The same attack. Okay. I hate it when you guys are better than me at tactics. That's not fair. Okay, so yeah, queen C5 threatens G5 check, doesn't it? Okay. Excellent. And so queen C5, what do we do here?
So you move your queen to G7.
To G7 to guard G5? Okay. So we keep stopping him from checking us, huh?
He's running out of files.
Check there. Okay. And
He's got
sacrifice
nothing.
there.
He's got nothing after that.
Okay. Queen G7. Well, it certainly means that he doesn't have one of those checks, does he?
And you're still threatening the bishop.
Yeah. Still threatening the bishop. Where's the bishop going? Bishop, let's say, goes to C6. Do we have a way to finish him off? I'm sorry?
That's interesting.
We could try piling up on the knight with rook d4. The queen's
if you
guarding that
took-
square now.
You would have to take.
Rook c7 is my instinct, but I don't know that that's necessarily a win. I like rook c7, I'll tell you why, because that bishop, once again, is the only thing holding up white's position, right? If that bishop was gone, we take the knight, he's done. So if I go here, I pin the bishop. That's what I like about that move. Now I'm threatening rook takes knight check.
That's sweet.
Okay? So how does
You're
black
also-
cause trouble for me now?
Threatening a mate.
Rook to F1.
F1? Okay. And then, let me see. If we take, then the rook's being drawn away from E3. I like it. See, so rook F1.
Well, then you just move the queen over.
To where?
Oh, that's right. 1 second. Why not?
What about rook to
why not
C8?
G
What happens after rook to
Yeah.
C8?
or queen to G8.
Yeah, I just now played, yeah. Rook there, pin the bishop, and it threatened rook C8, right? Okay, which is a more important threat. Let's just see that one first.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but right now, apparently rook f1 doesn't work.
No.
Okay. What could black play? Okay. Oh, you know what? What is guarding f1? Like you said, what's guarding f1, Mike? Like you were thinking of earlier. The only thing guarding f1 is what?
Rook.
Is the rook. What's the only thing guarding e3 from the queen?
Rook.
The rook. So the rook is trying to guard two things at once. Can we overload the rook?
Queen check.
Ah,
Okay.
what do you think?
Check.
See it? Queen goes there, check. The rook can't guard both of those, it doesn't look like to me. The knight's stopping the king from getting off the back rank. So how about that one? I think,
Then you take.
well, but the rook is not only guarding this, it's trying to guard this square.
Ah.
So if I draw the rook off the back rank, I think the rook comes down here to f1 check. Doesn't it?
But then you just go up with the rook and it's a checkmate.
Okay, so, okay, we're in
No,
check,
the
right?
other rook.
We're in check.
Oh, you're in check.
Yeah.
That's right.
I hate it when they put me in check. Then I can't do other things I want to do.
That messes everything up.
Yes, it is. It's a real pain in the neck, isn't it? Okay, so I can't take that, can I? Okay, so I think that wins for black. I think I'm all of a sudden not very happy. I think my rook c7 was a little bit too overzealous. Is there some other way we could try to win this? Okay, so he's hitting our rook.
You're not making it easy.
Okay, he's hitting our rook. See, if I played queen to d4 or rook to d4, I'd be cutting off his queen. Well, if I play queen d4, he's got g5 check, so I'm not sure convinced that works. Although I could possibly guard on e3. If I play rook to d4, though, his queen's blocked off, and I'm piling another piece up on that knight, on that pinned knight on e4. That looks like it'd be pretty strong.
Why not just the rook to a7?
Rook to a7?
Oh no, that the queen will take. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm liking rook d4 or queen d4. If I play rook d4, he can't play. Can you guys tell why he can't go to g5 check? Can't do that because what will we do? His queen goes there.
Take. Because
We'll just snap it off, right? He can't even take back, can he? Okay, because the knight's pinned. So with rook d4, I'm piling up on that knight with two pieces now. Okay, how's he going to guard that knight? I see
Rook.
two ways he could guard it. Yeah, guard the rook, or he can guard it with queen f5. Now, one of the reasons I think that's not that hot is because I have another way to attack that knight. If he plays, let's say, his rook there, then how many pieces do I have on that knight? I have this one, I have this one, I have two attackers, and how many defenders does he have? This one and rook on f4 and the bishop on c6. But if I play queen to g6 check, there's my third attacker. You see it? If I play queen to g6 check and then I snap this off, looks to me like I might be winning something. Okay, that's my first thought, my first guess. I might be able to create a series of checks too that pick up this loose rook. This rook's not protected. Okay, I don't see it yet, but it looks like it could be something there that's a problem for him. Okay, but let's see. If I play rook takes knight, let's try it. He plays what? Rook takes rook, or bishop takes rook. Then if I play check, what, on g6? Then you can move the king away. And now I can snap this bishop. But taking the bishop is a little bit of a problem because my rook's no longer guarding what when he takes this? When I take this. My rook's not guarding the back rank.
When he went down with the rook, didn't he leave the king open?
When he moved the rook, yeah. He did. Well, you mean in the back rank, though.
Yeah.
So I do have a check back there, like queen g8 check. But the question is, does it get me anywhere? His king would go to, his king can't go over here,
If
but
you,
it can go to e7. Okay.
yeah.
So I might have something there. I just don't see it yet. I could try.
Well-
I would love to check on g5 and pick up his loose rook, but he's got a queen on that too.
If you move this queen over, it'll allow you to come down to E6 or E6.
Okay. So queen to what? Queen to
If he blocks with, if you go queen to G,
a check. He goes king e7.
and then you come down to
Square. I keep looking at as d8, but I'm not sure yet.
there. You come over to D8. D8.
But if he goes king f7 after that, how do we
King
continue?
to F7.
Yeah. So if we play queen g8 check, he plays king to e7. Now we play what? Queen to what? d8 check,
Something like that.
and then he can play king to f7.
And you move,
I'd love to be able to get this rook into d7 check. I could distract maybe the bishop on c6 by taking here.
pushing over a little further.
By doing what?
If you go down.
Check here, c7.
There,
Yeah.
See if he'll push over.
Well, actually, that's a great move because it not only, because it hits the rook too. And the loose rook is one thing I've been trying to check around, try to create a series of checks that ended up leaving me threatening his rook, you know. So that is picking up the rook. That's got to be winning. Because as soon as I take his rook, he takes my rook, and I'm happy, right?
I like that. I like it when you're happy.
What if he plays king back to king? What if he just tries to move his king away now?
You still got the rook.
Okay. But then if I take his rook, doesn't he take my rook?
That's a problem.
I hate it when they just like defend like that. It pisses me off.
Yeah, kind of tick shock with
Yeah.
it.
Is there a way to get that
Pretty interesting. So what?
file after the game to start
Let me- Well, let me ask you a question. What's guarding this knight right now? Tell me what's guarding the knight.
Rook and the bishop. Oh,
The rook and the bishop. But wait a second.
takes.
Which one of those is not really guarding the knight? The bishop's not really guarding it, is it? See it? Because if that bishop moves, I'm going to snap his queen. So if I just take this guy, I think I'm happy. He takes with what? Takes with the rook. I take with the rook, and I think I'm pretty happy here. What's the material? Am I winning? What do you guys think? Yeah, I'm winning. Okay. So that is winning. So that check created lots of problems. It wasn't just that it was hitting the rook, which turned out it was, unfortunately, black had a counter, but it also pinned the bishop against the queen. Okay, on the diagonal. So queen check. He can't move here or here, and his knight would be his queen would be pinned. But what if I check him here? What if he goes king to, let's say, g6? Now what?
You still got his knight.
Okay. His knight.
Knight is rook.
Okay, rook takes knight. That's right. Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. Okay. So it is pinned. But
Oh,
then, he
he
can
can
play
check
queen
you,
check
yeah.
here.
Yeah,
I don't know if that might be okay for me. But I go king d2. Then maybe he could play queen here check, or queen takes pawn check. Yeah, this is. Oh no, I can't play queen takes pawn check because the queen's guarding it. Play queen to g2 check, but then maybe the white rook comes back to e2. It's not that clear, is it? Looks like black might be in trouble. Okay, but what I keep looking at is this. I keep looking at, well, what if I take his rook, which leaves my queen guarding the f-file, and then when he takes, I start checking over here with my queen and my rook. I'd love to play rook g1 check after that, but his queen is guarding it. But maybe I can play, like, let's say queen g4 check and rook to f1 check. But then maybe his king can take haven on the e-file, I'm not sure. Okay. I could then try lateral checks over here with my queen and rook.
You checked him right now
Where?
with rook to g1.
Okay.
Where would he go? What would his options be there?
Okay. Let's find out.
What's
So
the
now
best?
let's suppose he plays king to what? F5 maybe?
So then you could check him
Where?
with the queen to f7.
Okay, and then does knight come back? Is that possible? That would be a trade though, because his king's trying to guard his knight and his rook on f4.
No, what you would do is come over with the queen.
The problem is his queen in the end might take our rook down there.
Well, if you came over to
G6 check?
g6 check,
Gotcha.
where's he going to go from there?
Okay, queen to g6 check. His king maybe goes back to what? E6. But now I guess, well, we can't. Yeah, we can take the rook, can't we? Yeah, that does win
And you end up taking the rook.
because my queen is guarding the other rook.
Uh-huh.
He does have a check here, though,
Ouch.
and that hits this loose rook, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so that doesn't. That's not going to make me happy.
What in a perfect
I
match?
like rook takes rook here.
Rook takes rook, or where? Last move,
Yeah, right here.
right here.
Yeah.
So rook takes rook,
And
Okay,
then
so that's a
queen takes
check.
rook
and then no, he's in check.
King takes rook.
King
Oh.
takes rook, and then queen takes knight check.
No, then rook to F1 check.
Okay,
Oh.
king takes rook.
Rook to F1.
Okay, and there's bishop blocks. Is that what? Oh, and then we take the knight check and take the bishop. Yeah. Yeah, I think it doesn't matter because I think we're going to take the knight anyway, right? With check. And that's going to be winning. So when we play queen f7 check, he can't just block with the knight. He'd have to do something like, what? King to e5? And it's kind of tricky because we could try checking on g5, but then when he takes here, we can't just snap his queen off because he snaps our queen off. So it's not that clear what's
Unless
going
you
on
went
yet.
to g7 with the queen and then up later with the rook.
Okay. This is pretty interesting, isn't it? Let's go back a move. Okay, so we check on f7. He goes to e6. You say he goes king to g6, right? So how do we win this? You know what? I still wonder if this is actually winning. So let's take a look at this. He takes with the rook, right? I take back. He checks on. There's the check on g1 that I left behind when I tried to do this. King here. Oh, he's got a check here though, doesn't
Then
he?
he could take with the rook.
He-
Take the rook.
He can't. Or yes, he could. Bishop takes rook. Okay. Yeah, this isn't that great for me. Yeah, this is not great for me, is it? It's an illusion. So how can I win this? Well, since we're going to be here too late tonight, maybe we should just let the computer help us out here a bit. I mean, we could stay here another couple hours trying to figure this out. But let's let the computer see what the computer thinks. The computer thinks that I should play rook to d8. Okay. What I don't understand is why can't he just play the same idea? Oh, I see, because if he plays this check now, this rook can come back and block in the end. You see it? So now that check doesn't work because rook takes queen, rook there check. The other rook can come back now. So apparently rook here threatens to do things like bring the rook over, have the rook swing in from behind and continue the attack. Wasn't that easy to find though, was it? Okay. Pretty interesting. Okay, let's go back and see how Anand finished this. Let's see this. So if the knight goes back to f6, if the knight goes back to f6, we take the rook, get a queen. He takes back. We play knight takes e6. If he plays king takes, we play queen f5 check. If he plays king to where were we looking at? King to f7, right? And then we were trying rook d7 check. But maybe we just go queen h7 check. How about that one? Maybe we smoke him out that way. That looks better. Because now we stopped his king from running away. The only way, he can't run off to the side. He's got to go back in the center. And then we can use our other rook, right? Say king to e6. And now we play what? Can we play this check? Oh yeah. Well, see now.
Yeah,
Rook takes check.
you could block with the knight now because the bishop's covering the knight.
Block with the knight
When you move the rook over,
to where? G1?
if you're like
E1, yes, you could block with the knight, exactly. I'm not convinced that I don't still win though, because I've got things like queen, a6 or g6 check, and he can't move his king away because I'll snap off his queen.
right.
But what he can do is block with the rook. So I have to follow up in that sequence. Maybe queen e8 check or something. I'm not sure. But let's check that one. So queen, if he play rook check here, he'd have to block, let's say, with the bishop or the knight. Suppose he does it with the knight. Now I could check here. That would force his, because he can't just move the king out of the way, I could snap the queen off. He'd have to go here, right? And now I'm wondering if queen e8 check isn't winning, something like that. Of course, you know, if we play rook takes knight check, we're ahead in material, aren't we? Doesn't rook takes knight check, isn't that leave us ahead in material? I'm not sure that's the way to win this, but or queen e8 check. Let's, I mean, we might as well explore it. King can go to f5. How do we continue this? How about rook f1 check? King to g5 or g4. And can't play the d5 check. Queen to g8 check maybe, or queen e5 check.
E5 gives you the rook or something. Gives you something.
No, he goes back to g6, then what? Okay, let's go back. Queen to g8 check. Do what? No, he can block with the rook, unfortunately. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's a win there. Oh, I know. Maybe we could play rook check here. See if we play rook check here. He'd have to... He can't go here because we made him on h8. He could try king h5, but then I could check him on h7. There we go. I think that might win. Now he has to go there. Now, let me see. I can check him here, here. Those look like they might win somewhere there. Let's see. Queen check here. He can't bring the knight in because I'll meet him, right? So he'd have to go here. I'm liking this because his king has absolutely no squares now at this moment.
Just right in front of him.
Where is it?
Just
Oh,
move
how
the
about rook to
queen-
g4 check?
Just move the queen in front of him.
Queen where? Oh, queen here. Yes. So of course. Duh. Okay, so let's go back. So that would win. He can't really... That means he can't go this way, the king side. He'd have to go the other way. Say to f5. And now how do I win this? Okay. This is pretty complicated. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Let's go ahead and, in the interest for the sake, let's finish this off and just show the game that Anand finished it with. Pretty interesting. Now, you probably know that Anand is famous for his tactics. You know, he's world champion from 2000, 2002 also. He became Grandmaster 1 year after this in 1988. He was also world champion from 2007 to 2013. And then Magnus Carlsen started his reign. But let me see. Let's go back to the actual game. So after g6 check, he moved his king back to, or he moved his king to g8. And now Anand moves his queen to h3. Threatening mate. And the idea is that the queen is also hitting e6. So even though he's threatening to get rid of this g6 pawn, we could then take on e6. For example, if he took this, he's not guarding this. So if he took this, we could play, for example, rook takes rook check, I think. That would be one thing. King takes, then we could play knight takes pawn check. And you can see that after his king moves, our knight takes the rook. And our rook is guarding it. You see it? So we're definitely winning. So he doesn't want to play it that way. So what he decides is the only way he can stop this checkmate is to bring this knight here. And then Anand says, okay, fine. Snap my knight off. And what's the only way he can stop checkmate now? Going to be take the g-pawn, right? And then Anand finds a really good finish here. He takes on g7. By the way, when he takes on g7, if it was his turn to move again, what would he do? Well, he'd take the rook check, or he'd move his queen into h8. If his queen was right there right now, where would Black's king go? Can't. Rook's in f1. That'd be it, wouldn't it? So after we take, he could even try taking the rook. And in fact, I think that's what he did.
So why not take the pawn with the king?
Okay, king takes pawn. And now we play knight takes pawn check, right?
Yeah.
I think it's about here the guy gave it all up. But let's suppose king g8. And now we could play rook takes this rook. Could try playing rook takes rook there. He takes. And now looks pretty good. Rook to f8. Can't do that yet. Queen h6. And he takes that. What about just knight takes rook? Isn't that winning? That's good enough, isn't it? Yeah, it's good enough. Okay, because if he takes back here, he's got a check here, but we just go off to the queen side, to the b1 square. So even if he takes back, what's the material here? Well, these pawns match up, those two pawns match it up. We got an extra pawn here, and we've got a rook for a bishop, right? That's got to be winning. He doesn't even have any major threats or anything to counter all that. So I think that would be good enough. That's if he takes the g7 pawn. If he trades rooks first, let's see, can we take on h8 check first? Yeah, check there, king up, and now we take this. See it? Because this is with check. And now what's he going to do? Well, I guess he's going to have to move over here. And now we probably have one of several amazing wins. Why not queen f8 check? I don't see why not. Because if he takes it, we just take back with the pawn, right? And that looks pretty good. Check, king there. Maybe rook check. King there. Looks like you can almost just take this on d8. Because if he takes with the king, what do we do? What do you think, Tom? Dan? Yeah, get a queen, and then what? Where's he go? Goes nowhere. That's a mate, isn't it? So when we take this with our queen, queen takes rook check, the only thing you can do is take with the queen. But now what can white do to finish this off? Trying to look for different things, but I want to queen this queen, right? I want to get a queen, but what's stopping me? This guy.
Move the rook forward.
So yeah, I just cut communications off, don't I? However, he's got this check at the end, doesn't he? You guys agree?
Yeah.
Think about it. Do you agree? If I play my rook here, can he just check me here?
No.
No, he can't, because what? Because my rook's here, he is pinned, isn't he? I don't think there's much left. Okay, I think that's good enough.